Thank you. So Van, I just want to start off with the obvious question, but what are your feelings that Dade leaving the district?
Well, I want to first, on behalf of the board, thank Terry for his service. Although it was brief, there's no doubt in anybody's mind that he is a committed educator, a fantastic father. We did have the opportunity to witness that. And a guy with great potential. Again, the only regret is how I would describe how I'm feeling, is that he wasn't able to stay longer. And why do I say that? I think this was a very difficult time for anybody to be a superintendent or Board of Education member. Some unprecedented things happened throughout this country and in our own city. And I think had Terry stuck around a little bit longer, he would have seen the board and this community in a different light. And we, that is the citizens of Rochester, including the members of the Board of Education, would have seen him in a different light. And I'm not saying that what we saw was not good enough, but it clearly, under the circumstances, everybody's a little bit different, particularly because of COVID-19. And not to mention, Terry had an unusual set of circumstances where he was literally behind the 8 ball when he came in. We all understand that. But I think staying here just for 9 months, and most of it being in crisis mode, did not give him and did not give the board and did not give this community the opportunity to see us as a family, and I use his words, that we might have had he stuck around a little bit longer.
Okay, and my second question, now he said that he was unable to work coherently with the board. So was that surprising to hear? Do you guys also have that thing, or what are your thoughts on him saying that?
Well, implicit in his question, I hope, is the assumption that it was a relationship. And relationships work both ways. Could we have done some stuff differently? I'm sure there's not a person in the newsroom today that would deny that you could and should do something different in a relationship, professional or personal. But the same would apply for Terry. I hope that he, in pursuing his new district opportunity in Cornwall, I hope he too sees an opportunity to grow from this. But far be it from me to focus on that, because our focus is our children and our budget. So we really Godspeed to Terry. And although our relationship was very brief, and I make the qualifying statement that I think it could have been different had he been able to stay around a little bit longer. Again, I want to emphasize, nobody, not you, not anybody in your newsroom, not anybody in my home, is the same person they were before COVID-19. And the best relationships require patience and endurance. And that, your initial question is, what are my feelings? My feelings are regret, because I think if he had hung in there a little bit longer, and I know it was difficult for him, it was difficult on all of us, but I know it was especially difficult on him. He might have gotten to the point where he had a better appreciation of what was possible here in Rochester. And by the way, I think some people who are looking at him differently now would look differently at him had he stuck around and worked through the challenges.
Thank you.
Van?
Yes, sir. Hey, Jay.
Hi, Van. Superintendent's jobs are not obtained in a week or two. He obviously either applied or was found longer than then. Have you had any conversations about when he made this decision? And when did you know that this was around the corner?
No, Mr. Brown, we had no idea. Now, again, let me repeat, we're living in unprecedented, challenging times. This has been difficult on everybody, not to mention the families and the citizens of Rochester are going through things that, pale, what we are experiencing, pale in comparison to what families are going through, deaths and people losing jobs. So we knew that Terry, like everybody else, was having his share of challenges and frustrations. And it shouldn't surprise anybody here. He probably had the most difficult, most consecutive series of challenges of any superintendent that I've had the blessing to work with. So I give him that, and I understand that. But again, I want to repeat, people are living through a lot more difficult stuff than me or anybody else, including Terry at 131 West Broad Street. But to your question about when did we know, literally Wednesday was the first time that I or my colleagues found out. We found out because his lawyer sent the district lawyer a letter saying that he intended on resigning. So that was the first time we realized that Terry was at a point, which again, anybody could understand given what the challenges he had, that he might get to that point. But in any decent relationship, you got to communicate where you're at. And he did not ever tell us that he had sort of reached the point where he thought he couldn't get the budget done, which he subsequently did communicate to the media. And he certainly never got to the point where he said to us directly, hey, listen, this is not working. I'm at that point where I'm feeling like I have to. Never said that to anybody. Now, again, he's a good man, a great father, very good educator. I think he has a real vision about pedagogy and curriculum. And that's where my regret lies. Had he communicated that those assets that he has were not being utilized, and so that he had to leave, I think we could have had a conversation, and we would have had a conversation. I will tell you something that I don't know many people know. We had planned because COVID is very challenging for everybody, so it wasn't difficult to see how it affects my colleagues or how it was affecting Terry. And because of that, we had arranged for a meeting on Thursday. It had been set weeks in advance, at least a week and a half in advance. So that meeting was intended to have a sort of proactive conversation about where we were all at and to make sure we were communicating in an appropriate way. Ironically, his lawyer contacts our lawyer on Wednesday morning, but the meeting where we were going to have that sort of restorative, healing conversation and make sure we were checking in with each other, sort of a check-in conversation about the good and the bad, was set for the following day. We never got to have that meeting on that Thursday because he announced that he was leaving.
Many people are pointing to the board as we churn through superintendent after superintendent. Folks have called for your removal and a structure change. Would you concede that there needs to be a shift in how the board operates?
Well, there is already, and it's ongoing. We had, even before the distinguished educator got here, we were having retreats, and we would constantly monitor and modify our procedures and protocols, not only in terms of how we relate to the superintendent, but how we relate to school principals and how we watch where the progress is. We don't have enough time for me to describe for you all the things that we did, even in advance of the distinguished educator getting here. But when he came, as you all know, we developed an 82-page plan that is very detailed, that is being monitored through long before a monitor was ever thought of, a project management software program called JIRA. Every commitment that we made in that 82-page document, from finances to how the board governs, is monitored on a day-to-day basis. We provide reports to the Commissioner of Education. So yes, to your question, but even before Terry left, we understood that there is a need, a critical need in any organization, but particularly one that services children, of continuous improvement. So we get that. We, in fact, even beyond the action plan, the 82-page action plan, Terry will tell you, I'm sure, that we've had retreats and conversations about how do we improve our communications. Anybody who's watched things as of late that happen to be telecast through Zoom on YouTube and Facebook, that's my little plug. I think most people will agree. The meetings are professional. They're not so prompt because we have a lot of business to talk through. Some of the stuff that maybe people saw maybe a year ago, you don't see that as frequently. Is it perfect? No. But is it getting better? I think so. Could it have gotten better with Terry? Yes. But we'll never know that because he left after 9 months.
Hey, Van, thanks for taking some time to talk to us. I just want to ask about the Warner School of Education with the University of Rochester. We know there was a connection there, and that they assisted in this district's hiring of a superintendent. What is your reaction to that, and does that affect RCSD's relationship with the University of Rochester?
Well, let me first say I'm in the other hat that I wear. I'm a lawyer, and I come from a pretty sizable law firm. That's where I had my first employment here when I was back here in Rochester. It was at Nixon Peabody. And most large law firms, small law firms, even the boutique law firms do what we call a conflict search. So before you take on a client, you find out whether you have an existing client that has something that might compete with an interest with the existing client. And if you find that there's some kind of conflict, it doesn't even have to be a legal conflict. It could be an ethical conflict. It could be an appearance conflict. You don't take the client. Now, let me say, and I don't want to disparage the good work that is being done by people at East High School. They're doing remarkable stuff. They started off with a 33% graduation rate. They're now at about 70%. Remarkable stuff in 4 years, unprecedented. It was our worst performing high school when they started their mission there. That is when the U of R started its mission there. Remarkable work being done by Mr. Nelms, a host of teachers and families. The sad thing is that somebody at the U of R didn't do what I think is not only basic to law firms, but to most credible businesses. And U of R, by the way, I don't want the messages to be conflicted here. They do great things in this community. But the fact is, somebody there made a mistake, and a grievous mistake, because I think it draws into question in some people's mind, well, what was going on here? Now, obviously, Mr. Dade took the job because he wanted to be there. No one forced him to take that job. But so he's not the victim of anything in that regard. But who are the victims here are the students and the staff and the families that have worked hard to get those numbers in an amazing place. And now people are wondering, was this kind of, so let me just tell you what we've done. As soon as I heard of, at that time it was a rumor, I immediately sent a letter to the U of R asking them whether this rumor, because when we first heard it, it was just off the media and there was no verification. We asked them, is this rumor true? The second question we asked them, if so, what exactly was the University of Rochester involvement? And then I finally said, someone will have to, I have questions, obviously, but my colleagues will have questions. And the expectation is that someone will come here and explain, provide answers to those questions. The next thing that followed was the U of R, I'm sure you got it, issued a press release or a statement. It speaks for itself. It speaks of regret. It speaks of the notion that they are probably going to do a forensic, or they're going to look back and figure out, could they have done some stuff different? But what I don't want to get lost here in what I believe to be, this is my assessment, not as a lawyer, but just totally inappropriate conduct. And perhaps it was a mistake. Maybe it was an oversight. And we don't even know exactly what their involvement was. We do superintendent searches, as you know, quite often. Sometimes it involves doing a survey. Sometimes it involves setting up people for interviews. Sometimes it's actual recruitment. Either way, no matter what the facts end up being, it just wasn't necessary. There are hundreds of search firms throughout this country. And if somebody came to somebody at the U of R from that school district and say, hey, will you do a search? Do a superintendent search for me? I would have hoped they would have done what I think is basic in business, which is to do a conflict search. And because they didn't do that, a lot of good people, reputations are, for a moment at least, are drawn into question. And that's truly unfortunate. This is a great project. The U of R is one of this community's greatest assets. But I think to a certain extent, for the time being, people have questions, and they're legitimate questions. And the board has questions, and we're going to get them answered.
Van, a follow-up on that note is, speaking of the good things that have been at East High School, it's very early right now, I know, but as you start to think about what's coming next with an interim superintendent or a permanent one, will you look maybe local and might a name that you'll consider, would that be superintendent at East High School, Sean Nelms?
Well, you know, I'm going to be very honest, and I did give Sean a heads up and tried to tell him that I was going to be saying this. I didn't talk to him directly, but I'm just one of 7 board members, so I can't speak for the board. The board might decide something different. I just don't see, under the circumstances, how that would be plausible. And you could do it. You absolutely could do it. And let me just say, I hope you put this in there if you bring this question. Dr. Nelms, Dr. Nelms has been here for a long time, certainly longer than 9 months. He is a guy of impeccable character. He's a homegrown guy. He's from Buffalo. He knows the struggles of urban students. He's a doctor in education. He's a great father as well. He has led the East High School to, I don't think, when we created it, nobody thought that we'd be at this place in just 4 or 5 short years. So I want to preface my comments that Dr. Sean Nelms is an incredible guy, and under any other circumstances, he would be one of the top candidates for any superintendency, much less Rochester. And I suspect that one day when he wants to, he'll have the pick of the litter. And this is just one board member speaking. I cannot speak for my full board, but it would be a bit of a climb, and it might be a bit distracting. The focus, this sounds very cliche-ish, but most of the time you guys ask me about this whole situation, whether you're talking about Terry or Sean, I'm going to say to you, this is a conversation about adults. Every minute, every moment we spend talking about adults is time away from closing in on that budget and focusing on the needs of children. So that's just my thought. I think Sean is I can't really say this enough, an incredible leader. Sure, the results at East are a reflection of a community portfolio of work, but Sean is clearly right up there in that page 1 of that portfolio. And he has done some remarkable stuff in conjunction with his colleagues there. And I suspect at some point when he decides, I know he will be a great superintendent somewhere. I just don't think that given what has been disclosed about what one person, I don't know how many people did, it would be appropriate. And out of respect for Sean, I have tried to communicate that in advance. It is not a reflection of his ability. And if you talk about this, I hope you can at least throw in a line that says that he's a remarkable leader. And we're still waiting for all the facts. I know that one of the first things I said about him is a guy of remarkable integrity. I know he would not have been involved. At least I believe in my heart of hearts, he would not be involved in anything like that. And my other belief is he's going to be a great superintendent somewhere. And to be honest, just to repeat, I think he'll be a great superintendent whenever he wants to be the superintendent.
Thanks, man.
Hi. So according to
Hi, Patty.
Hey, according to Terry's contract, if it's mutually agreed upon, he can't leave prior to 90 days. When is his last day? Is he still the superintendent right now?
He absolutely is a superintendent right now. No decision has been made with respect to when he's going to leave. Of course, I think you guys have the letter. We released it. I think he said the end of July. But we're just in this place just 48 hours. There's lots of discussions to be had. Many of them will take place with our attorney, and they'll be necessarily confidential. So I don't know when he's going to be leaving. I do know that Terry is our superintendent, and the board's expectation is, and knowing her the way I do, I know he will do that job just as described in his letter.
So he's a lame duck now, and you still have lots of budget decisions left to be made. Budget discussions already have been very contentious with people wanting things back. That's been frustrating to him. How do you expect it to go in the next few weeks with a lame duck superintendent?
Well, that's a phrase that is used quite frequently in a lot of different contexts and probably doesn't accurately describe the uniqueness of the situation. One of the things I would add, Patty, is that he, as he indicated in his letter, he's a tremendously competent person, a committed person. The Terry that I know, again, I only got to know him for 9 months. No matter what labels people put on him, my expectation is, and my belief is, that he will do the job that he is being paid to do. One, because he's receiving a salary, and two, because I do believe that he is a guy who has tremendous capacity and ability and will come through with the budget that is necessary. The other thing that I should note is, I'm just going to fix my screen here. The other thing that I would note is that Terry has hired a tremendous team around him, has put a tremendous team around him. And if anybody had the chance to catch the city council meetings that was chaired by finance committee, that was chaired by Malik Evans, former school board member, he and chairperson LeBron from our finance committee and the board of education and the finance committee from city council agreed that We needed to get out way ahead of this and have conversations about the budget. In years past, we did it right when the budget was due. This year, we're having, I think, at least 2 meetings with City Council. And the reason why I mentioned that, Patty, if you saw who was responding to the City Council questions and making the presentation, it was our Deputy Superintendent, Linda Quick, and our Chief Financial Officer. So they both did a great job. They answered the questions that they could, and any questions they couldn't answer, they'll be followed up on. So the board is very focused, as is everyone at 131 West Broad Street, on getting an on-time budget that, under the circumstances, provides for a sound education of our children. Would we like there to be more money? Yes. Are there going to be conversations about where that limited money is going to be spent? Yes. Are there going to be some people that think, wait a second, this is not completely satisfactory to me? Absolutely. But we will deliver an on-time budget because we have the staff, the superintendent, and a board of education that is determined to do that.
Thanks.
Yep.
Hi, Van. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear. Hi, David.
Hi. Thanks for taking my question. I appreciate it. All the questions that I had were already covered by the other reporters, but I would like to just double back on, what you might look for in a superintendent going forward. Will anyone, I presume that the search will be far and wide, but how much emphasis will be placed on searching for someone local? Is that a concern of yours? Is it a priority to have someone local who doesn't have to relocate and might not have some of the adjustment problems or might not be familiar with the area? How important is that to you and the board going forward?
I think that's a great question, and given the circumstances, a pretty obvious one. Some might speculate that that's one of the complicating reasons that Terry is leaving, and I think that's a legitimate observation. I know he expressed to you all a variety of reasons, but in looking for a superintendent, that's something that you might want to look at. I just want to describe for you our process to the extent that we've established it thus far. We met today with our lawyer to discuss contractual stuff, but we're meeting tomorrow to follow up with some of those conversations, because the first thing we have to do 2 things. One, get that budget in on time as best we can, and we have good staff at central office. But the other thing we have to do, which is to follow up on your question, is we have to first identify an interim. Or in the alternative, we, unfortunately, because Terry was just here 9 months, we just did a superintendent search. So there's a pool of candidates. Terry wasn't the only finalist, as you all recall. There's a pool of candidates that were finalists and then other candidates as well. It's entirely possible, the board hasn't made any decisions, David, but it's entirely possible the board might decide at tomorrow's meeting or a subsequent meeting to pull from that pool of candidates. And a decision might come sooner than later. We also might decide to engage another full-blown search. And I should say, I believe, and this is the only thing I'll be equivocal on, I believe in the prior search contract with the firm, we had an agreement that, and our lawyers are looking at this, but if the person didn't stay up to a year, they could redo the search at cost. In other words, we'd have to pay for the travel. So thank God our taxpayers wouldn't be looking at another bill if we use the same search firm. So that's going to be our process. When you do that kind of process, you do set up some priorities. Do you want the person to be local? Sometimes you do surveys that reflect whether the community wants to do that. Personally, just for me, David, I can't speak for the whole board, but given what we just went through, I do think that is something that I will be considering, how connected the person is, not just because there's ties to the community, but also because there's familiarity with the community. And given where we're at as a district, and you have written about it and others have too, while we've made some progress, we got a ways to go. And to the extent we can prevent somebody from having to reinvent the wheel and create a new, get to know people and do a listening tour and all that stuff, which takes time, that would be a significant factor for me personally. So we would want the person to hit the ground running. And the logical assumption is if the person is local, they don't have to do as much of that as everybody else.
I'm sorry, they don't have to do as much what?
They don't have to do much of the groundwork. Oftentimes when you see new superintendents come in, they do a 90-day speaking tour, listening tour, and And if theoretically, if you had somebody who'd been around even at central office or in the community as an area superintendent or an educator, you might be able to hit the ground running. And I don't argue with anybody. We cannot afford to lose a step. I've said to people, and people, it's not going to say when I say this, when I got started, when many of my colleagues got started, the 4-year graduation rate from the state of New York was 39%. We're now at 63. East remarkably went from 33 to 70%. They were the worst performing school in the state of New York. So progress, however it is made, and I know you and I have had some conversations about how the progress is made, but we don't need to lose step in moving in the right direction. And to the extent we haven't made progress and we've made some mistakes, it would be best, I think, if we had somebody who knew how to rectify those issues and those concerns.
Just a quick follow-up on a question that was asked earlier.
Sorry, David. We're only doing 2 questions at a time, and then we can roll back in.
I'll be around, David.
I thought that was one question. It was just the question about the local.
All right, then I'm going to give you that
No,
shot.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Sure.
Yes, Brian Sharp is going to be on next, but he doesn't have video. So I just wanted to make sure that once you heard his voice, he would not be on video.
Okay, so I can go one more. Okay, just real quick on the U of R. The statement, you referenced it earlier. It sounds like you've read it, and I don't want to belabor it. You gave a long answer, but they say here that university leaders had no idea that. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the exact terminology here, but that no idea that Dade was a candidate. Do you buy that? Now they're referring to university leaders, not necessarily the Warner School, but I'm just curious if you buy that quote unquote university leaders did not know. Here it is. University leaders and East EPO leaders were entirely unaware of the fact that Terry Dade had become a candidate. Do you buy that?
I don't want to repeat my prior answer, but I guess to try to hone in on your question and what you're getting at. The best I can say is I've dealt with the EPO people for 4 or 5 years now, and they've operated in my mind and my experience with a great degree of integrity. They were responsible for submitting numbers to the state, and those numbers come back, and that's one way I monitor or understand someone's credibility in this educational context. There's never been an instance where the state, for example, said, oh, no, you're trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. So to answer your question, David, I have no reason to believe, given my past experience with them, that anybody that I have dealt with would ever do anything remotely like that, or would know that somebody at the U of R was in possession of this kind of information, and someone who I have connections with, let's say Dr. Nelms, that he would not tell me and say, hey, let's set this straight. This is not right. Again, as I said, you don't have to be a lawyer to know that, and this is a large organization, an extremely credible and critical organization in our community. They know about conflicts, and that whoever was running this should have known about running a conflicts check. It's not a complicated thing to do. But here's the other thing, David, and I can say this because I've done this. People make mistakes, right? And when they do, everybody else should pay the cost for that. And what I'm referring to is all the good people, and I would include Dr. Nelms in this, all the good people and his staff and his administrators and the parents who've done, maybe in some quarters, would say arguably some great work. But I realize what people might get out of this. And my regret is that one person, it sounds like, from what I know, made a mistake. And now a number of people have to pay a price for that. In other words, the effort does have, I got to tell you, people might reasonably expect that there would be some cloud over this whole thing. And I think I've said to you before, David, in conversations, in some areas of public service like the one I'm in, we're not independent operators. And so how we are perceived and the success or failure of efforts is very much contingent upon what other people do or don't do. And I've experienced that many times. And I'm sure that what I've done sometimes has negatively affected other people. But I've certainly experienced when people do stuff and it negatively affects me. This is a classic example of it. You got people working their butts off at East High School, trying to turn that school around. They've had a great degree of success. One person, it appears, maybe two, made a mistake. Could be an innocent mistake. And you're sitting here asking me a question that understandably is being asked.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Brian Sharp, you can go ahead.
And I want to ask just, it's actually similar take on what David asked, but I'm just wondering on the candidates, if you have any concern of going out nationally, given the financial state of the district right now, given that you have a superintendent who's just stayed for 9 months, does that hurt the district's ability to attract an outside candidate where they're likely going to have to go internal now?
No. If you're saying, Brian, maybe I understood your question. If you're saying we have to go internal because the national rep on roster is X, Y, and Z, I don't agree with that. I mean, Barbara Dean Williams stayed a little bit. She stayed on the national average 2 years, 6 months, and people were saying the same thing about, do you think you're going to be able to get a superintendent? Do you think people are going to apply? Marisol, who is a remarkable staff leader in our district, and her predecessor will tell you that that's the typical word, but we have never had, and this is not why you wouldn't want a superintendent to just stay 9 months, but I will tell you that we have never had a problem getting national and internal candidates. Not the last time, and I don't expect that's going to, we'll see, but I don't think that's going to be the case even this time.
Okay. And have you reached out to any of the finalists?
No. Yeah, again, we've just been in this place. Terry's been apparently thinking about it for some time. The board has just been in this place for 48 hours. So we understand we have to be focused with laser-like accuracy on getting that budget done and focusing on our children, and then getting an interim and or focusing on a permanent superintendent. So we don't have all the plans in place, but no, so we don't have a specific date or time or search firm, or it's still very early. We're meeting again tomorrow with our lawyer to discuss some of that legal stuff, which we can't discuss publicly, but that will probably get us in a place where we can figure out what the next step is. Again, I got to tell you, and I really do want in my comments to be honorable and respectful of Terry, because again, I think he is a great father, a really committed person to education. But I got to be honest and straightforward about this. We were blindsided. We did not. And again, it's not to say Terry wasn't struggling and that we weren't struggling over COVID and there were difficult conversations about the budget. I absolutely observed that. That happens in budget cycles, and it also happens when something unprecedented happens, like COVID-19. So I don't want that to be the comment that we didn't, we're trying to work things out. But in the end, we didn't know that he was at the point where he was saying, I can't negotiate this budget with you any further. And more importantly, we had no idea that he was at the point where he was saying, I can't work with you any further. I'm going to resign. No, sir. And I want to be very clear about this. Weeks ago, we've had retreats because we realized we're not perfect as a body. Nobody is perfect as a body. We've had retreats, restorative circles that help the board and Terry and the surrounding community become better partners and have better relationships. We spent a lot of energy and time in retreats on Saturdays and Sundays. Terry's been part of that. But here's a really interesting thing. Because we realized this was very stressful for Terry. He was being asked to do stuff that nobody else was being asked to do. So a week and a half ago, we asked Terry, and he agreed to come to a meeting so we could talk about some of this stuff, be a little bit more proactive, right, in terms of the development of our relationship and address issues. That meeting was set for Thursday at 3 o'clock, I think it was. We got word, however, that he was, from his lawyer, that he was leaving the day before on Wednesday morning. So we never even had a chance to, if he had legitimate concerns, and I'm not here to argue that point at all with him or with anybody here, but we never had a chance to talk to him about it. And the detail about where he was at, that he was at this point where he had to, even he couldn't negotiate the budget, where those comments, the detail came out through the media. But I want to say, Brian, it is important, and you dedicate whatever space you want in the paper to my last comments, but it is important, I think, that we begin to refocus, not on Terry, but on our children. And I know, again, that sounds kind of hokey, but I do think we're going to be spending way too much time, I can anticipate we're going to be spending way too much time on adult issues, because that's what happens when you get lawyers involved. But the Board of Education is committed to focusing on that budget. And if you had any doubt about that, we were in city chambers via Zoom today, answering questions, having our staff that are totally capable and competent people that, by the way, Terry picked, a chief financial officer and a chief academic officer were there fielding questions and letting the community know. The broader thing that we were doing is letting the community know that we were moving forward. I will tell you, there was a question as to whether we were going to go forward with today. But we decided, and thankfully, Terry picked some great people that were capable of doing that. So that presentation, which Terry was intimately involved in designing and presenting, that is his budget, that went forward today. They got some questions from City Hall. We'll get some answers to them. And we're determined to produce an on-time budget that, to the best extent possible, addresses our children's needs.
Hi, me again. So why wasn't Terry presenting today? I understand that he was supposed to be at the meeting with City Council. Why wasn't he there?
It's a personnel matter. I can't get into it, but I do want to say that, well, again, it's a personnel matter, so I don't want to get into it. But the observation, anybody who saw that meeting saw two very capable, well-informed people from central office that I think did a remarkable job in answering the question. First of all, making the presentation, which I'm sure Terry was a part of, so he was literally there in spirit, because I know I've seen that presentation a number of times before. But they made that presentation without missing a beat. And I don't think anybody, it's not that Terry isn't important, he's critical. And again, that document was prepared through his leadership. But you can see that we have staff, even in his absence, for whatever reason, that allowed them to make the presentation. And I believe it was satisfactory to our colleagues at City Hall.
If the budget discussion was contentious before, and I'm going to go back to the fact that he's leaving, so he is not going to have to carry through this budget. How do you see it being more collaborative when the architect of it will not be carrying through the final product?
Well, architects make plans for people other than themselves to occupy, right? So it's not like the plan was for Terry to live in those school buildings and directly supervise those teachers and those cafeterias and those lesson plans. Superintendents have very little time to do a lot of that direct stuff. That's what principals are for, APs are for. So he was crafting a plan for other folks to benefit from. And by the way, that plan is not complete. Certainly the building hasn't been constructed. And to your point, Patty, there's a lot of dialogue, and I mentioned this at City Council today. There's a lot of dialogue that's going to occur between now and when the budget is due May the 7th that will finalize the plans for that 2021. But what will Terry's role be? Well, it's only 48 hours. We have to figure that out. He's constructed a plan. There would be no need, and absolutely, it would be ludicrous to try to reinvent the wheel at this particular juncture. There are elements of that plan that personally I think are sound. Some board members may not, and vice versa. We're going to have those conversations over the next 3 weeks. Those conversations will be with Terry and his staff, and we'll get there. And then there'll be this final plan or building, if you will, that we'll present to City Council, representing from our point of view, our collective point of view, what will work best under the circumstance for 2021 for the students and families and staff of the Rochester City School District.
Thanks, Dan.
Van, to Brian's point, do you believe with all that's happened over the last decade, with superintendent after superintendent, and what's happened in the last year, now with Dade, that the RCSD superintendent is a desirable job?
Whether it is a desirable job?
It's a desirable job to a top shelf candidate.
As I indicated, I think it was to Brian's question, we have never had a problem. Not that I'm proud of it, but it's a fact. We have never had a problem getting people to apply for this job. As you all recall, some of you might have been around. I'm not sure if you were around, Mr. Brown, at the time. I think you were. We were over at, Freddie Thomas, I think it was, some school in the Northeast. And we had a parade of candidates, top-notch candidates from across the country. I think it was Maryland. There's somebody from New York City. 4 or 5 candidates. Terry was one of them, from the Virginia area. Any one of them could have been our superintendent. And before we got to that level, we whittled it down to 12. And the distinguished educator was amongst the people that we were screening those candidates. He can tell you. I think our that level, we were down to 12. And before that, I don't remember what the exact number was, but I think it was in excess of 50. So we have not, and nor do I anticipate we'll have a trouble getting top-notch candidates. Every one of those candidates that took the stage, and the ones that didn't even take the stage, I'll use your words, Mr. Brown, were top-notch candidates.
And what is the state ed department's role in Terry's leaving the district? I understand there's been some conversations between the district and the ed department. What's their role in this?
I don't know that they have any role. I mean, that would be news to me. That they know we have some great people over there in Albany. Chancellor Rosa has been remarkable. The Board of Regents, I've indicated to some of your colleagues already that to facilitate this process of getting this budget done, she has agreed to, we asked her. State didn't impose it upon us. There's no legislation that required this. Terry didn't ask for it. The board said, you know what, we really respect Chancellor Rosa. We know that Terry has a good relationship with her. In the wake of this whole situation, might be a little bit awkward. Why not have an additional set of eyes on the process? Many of you may know Chancellor Rosa was at one point a superintendent, and she has graciously agreed to come to Rochester via Zoom and attend some of our budget deliberation processes and encourage a focus on the end zone, the finish line. So we're encouraged by that. But other than that involvement, which the board asked for, I'm not aware of any involvement that SED or anybody had in Terry leaving.
One last thing.
Yes.
Sure.
On obviously there's a monitor that's expected to come in over the next couple months. There's been calls from various unions saying that monitor should come in now, or even suggesting that Chancellor Rosa step in as that monitor now. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I don't have an official position from the board. Well, I think I do. I think I can comfortably say that it welcomes that the sooner the better. And consistent with that, again, we asked Chancellor Rosa not to come in as a monitor, but we're focused with racehorse blinders on getting to the finish line on this budget. And we thought that her experience, her gravitas, and quite frankly, she's a very accessible, transparent leader, really a remarkable leader. We thought, let's invite her in. And she said yes. So I think we'll get a budget on time, and we'll get it through with the assistance of Chancellor Rosa. I don't know, Mr. Brown, did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
We don't have anyone else with their virtual hand raised. So I will send this out as the one last shot for any more questions that you may have. Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and bring you in. Thank you.